Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. From Peterson's, I'm your host, Taylor Sienkiewicz, and you're listening to You Have a Cool Job, a podcast highlighting those who took their profession in a unique direction and what they did to get there. On this week's episode of You Have a Cool Job, we talked to Laura Forczyk, an astrophysicist. Laura owns Astralytical, a consulting company for space industry professionals. Before talking with Laura, I'll admit, I was a bit intimidated. I really felt like I have no business talking about astrophysics. But as you'll see, Laura brought the language down to earth for listeners like myself who are less familiar with the field, and shared her professional experiences in a very relatable way. To start things off, Laura shared how her childhood dreams sparked her interest in space and how these dreams translated later in life.
Ever since I was a little kid, in fact, third grade is when I wrote a story about going to the moon. And so I must have been sparked by something I read in school, maybe a book or maybe a unit we were doing on the Apollo program to the moon, because I have wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I remember. And in fact, my parents sent me to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama when I was in middle school and in high school, and I just absolutely fell in love with all things space. I had a telescope growing up, and I can't remember a time as a kid not loving space.
Oh, wow. That's so great then, that you started so early on your dream of what you wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, when I was in high school trying to figure out what to major in, that was the sticking point, because there were a lot of avenues to work in space. And I realized through the physics class I was taking that I loved the study of how things work, and especially trying to understand how things work in the universe and all of those beautiful Hubble images that we see coming down, all of those beautiful things that inspired me. And I wanted to understand how those things out there, those phenomena that we just take for granted. If we look at the night sky, we can see some of it with our naked eye, but most of it is just out there, and I wanted to understand it all.
Of course, a career like Laura's takes a fair bit of education. Laura began at the Florida Institute of Technology, earning her bachelor's degree in astrophysics. Laura was heavily involved in her studies, participating in the Society of Physics Students and the Students for Exploration and Development of Space Club.
I got my bachelor's in astrophysics, and at that point, I still hadn't really figured out exactly what I wanted to do with it, but I knew I wanted to continue on with my studies, and I always had NASA as a goal. And so I was very fortunate when I was in undergrad to get an internship at NASA at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and that's what encouraged me to go to grad school there at UAH, because they have a NASA center right there. So I essentially worked at NASA while getting my master's degree. Then I realized I don't like computer programming so much. And so science has a lot of programming in it. And so I realized I wanted to do more with my hands. So I switched over to something that I call experimental planetary science, where I was doing planetary science research with my hands. So there was still some data processing and analysis in there, but it was much more hands-on lab work. And so for my doctoral work, I did a lot of work. I moved to University of Central Florida in Orlando, and I just did a lot of hands-on experimentation. And that was a lot of fun, trying to figure out how dust works in space and on planetary bodies, and especially on the Moon and Mars. And I guess focusing closer to home on those planetary bodies that are right here in our solar system got me thinking about, back to me wanting to be an astronaut, how is it that humans interact with space? How is it that we want to interact with space in the future, and the missions that we have gone on and want to go on in the future? And so I started diving into some of the more practical, immediate applications and learning more about the space industry. And that's where I am today.
Okay, awesome. So how did you come up with your idea then for your consulting-based business?
That came to me 3 years ago. I was working for a startup company that went out of business. You know, any startup is risky, and I took the risk, and most of them fail, and some succeed, but this one was unfortunately not one that did. And so at that point, I was balancing motherhood and business. So I was actually 9 months pregnant with my first child when I was clearing out the office at Kennedy Space Center for that company. And I was like, what can I do now? I I suppose I could wait several months and then look for a full-time job, but I was like, why wait? Why not just try to start my own consulting business and see how it works? And I wasn't quite certain how it was all going to go together, but I decided to just go ahead and try, because why not take that risk? And that first year was a little rough, admittedly, but I absolutely love what I do. I have my own consulting business now for 3.5 years, and I work on a diversity of projects related to space and space industry and space policy and space science, and it's just been a blast.
Awesome. Okay. And how does your industry work? Because I'm not super familiar with the consulting side of space. So how do you acquire your clients, and just what are you mainly advising people on?
Sure. Yeah, it's very small right now. My company isn't one of those large ones that you might hear about. It's very small. We don't advertise. It's all word of mouth. And so any way that a company or an individual finds out about my company or about me, they can reach out to me with any project that they need assistance with. And so we work with NASA and with local governments and with small and large companies and with universities and individuals. And really, it's any project that they think I might have an expertise in, whether that's a technical project, given my background in astrophysics, or a more broader space industry project, which is where we really thrive, because I have this really great perspective on how the industry works as a whole. And so being able to help companies and individuals see the big picture is where we really specialize, and especially when it comes to human spaceflight and some of the more immediate aspects of how we use space today.
Okay. Yeah, and tell me about that experience of having a baby while you're starting your own company.
Yeah, that was a challenge, right? Because some people, once they have children, they just leave the workforce altogether, or they get back to work, especially in the United States where we don't have mandatory maternity or paternity leave. Some people are actually forced to go back to work very quickly within weeks and put their kids in daycare. And so I decided to try to do a balance between the two, where I was going to slowly ease back into the industry just by doing this part-time consulting, because I didn't know what I was doing exactly. I didn't know if I would get clients. I didn't know how it all worked. I reached out to some mentors of mine to get advice. And some of the feedback I got, though, was very hesitant. They were like, you're rather young in your career yet. What makes you think that someone's going to come to you? But I already had consulting experience working for other consulting companies, smaller ones. And so I figured I could do this on my own. And sure enough, once I started getting a reputation, people started finding me and coming to me. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know the people, the clients that I work with. It's definitely been a challenge, and I haven't hesitated to bring my babies. I have two now. I have a 1-year-old and 3-year-old, and when they are infants, I bring them with me. I take them to meetings. I take them to conferences. Only once have I gotten a negative response to that. Most of the time, it's overwhelmingly positive, where I have people grateful that I'm bringing, a baby to sort of normalize the fact that we are human beings, and we have our professional side along with our family side, and it's okay to showcase one and have the other one as well.
Yeah, has that inspired, have you seen anyone doing something similar then?
Not as much in my field. It's been pretty rare. I know that other fields are much more welcoming of young parents, but I haven't seen it so much. And so I guess in that way, I've been a bit bold in assuming that everyone's going to be okay with it. But so far, everyone, for the most part, has been. And of course, it's not a disruption. I make sure that everything I do stays professional and leave when I have to. But it's one of those things where I feel like that's an area of growth for the space industry, is to welcome more family-friendly activities, and especially here within the United States, where we aren't so family-friendly welcoming in the professional setting. It's an area of hopefully growth.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so tell me about some of your favorite projects that you've been working on.
Oh, gosh. So actually, I can tell you about a project I'm working on right now. It's an internal research project. So we are doing this within Astralytical ourselves. And we are putting together a series of just hot topic documents. So any topic that you can think of in the space industry that you might want to know more about. Space industry, space science, some of the really cool NASA missions that are going on, or maybe even some of the policy things, or really any topic that's in the news. We are diving into it and writing up these summary reports. And this is going to be published on our website in a few months, where we're going to help people understand what's going on with these sort of Cliff Notes kind of idea of what's going on, along with some of our analysis about, okay, where's this heading? What does this mean big picture? What can you assume from this information will come next? And just give that perspective to people so that the information can be made available to pretty much anybody, because it's going to be an inexpensive way to access this information that most of the time is pretty inaccessible to people.
Definitely. Cool. So what is kind of your work life like then? Is it like what % basically is consulting versus going to conferences and meetings? And what does a day look like for you?
So every day is different, of course, and it's a lot of the mundane of answering emails and taking phone calls. But some of my favorite parts of the day are when I get to interact with my clients one-on-one. And most of my clients are not local to me. So most of the time that's over the phone, where I get to really help them where they are, whatever they're needing, and just, be there for them in that way to facilitate whatever it is that they are trying to accomplish. And that, to me, is very rewarding. And what's really great is when I do get to meet people that I've interacted with online, I get to meet them in person sometimes. And that is just like great to put that face to it, to have that personal connection with someone that you've helped.
Yeah, and coming from a research background, is that something that you really like about what you do now, is having more of a connection with these people?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I don't think I could be the kind of person. To give you an idea, one of my research jobs was just sitting in a basement with a computer lab and mostly alone. I couldn't be that. Some people love that kind of, solitary environment. But for me, I like to be out and about. I need to be meeting people. I'm much more social. And so to combine the love of space and the work that I do with the social aspect, I think it brings perspectives that I wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah. And who are mostly your clients that you're working with?
A lot of times it's individuals who come to me because they have a project that they're working on, or they want to work in the space industry and don't know how. So I do career consulting as well. But also some of the times it's just small companies or universities that need assistance with trying to figure out what they're doing in terms of space research or their individual space projects, and they just need some help moving forward. I do have a contract with NASA to help them as a subject matter expert for planetary science missions, and that's pretty cool because the science missions that NASA puts on, there's a lot that goes on through it. So we have to evaluate the different ideas that people have and help NASA decide which ones have the best merit in order to fund and fly. So that, I feel like, is very rewarding in a big picture sense.
Laura will be back to share more about her journey right after this. Are you searching for the right college, grad school, or trade school to fit your needs? Or are you studying for those entrance exams you need a good score on? Peterson's has you covered. With advanced college and scholarship search functions, test prep for everything from the SAT to the MCAT to the firefighter exams, and tons of free resources on our blog, Peterson's helps you find, get in, and pay for school, plus much more. Visit petersons.com today. Now, back to the show. As a small company, it's natural Laura is attempting to grow Astralytical, starting simply by sharing the information she acquires. She tells us about her plans for this undertaking.
One of the main tenets of my company that I kind of took from the previous company I worked for that went out of business is that space is for everyone, space is for all. And that is one of those areas that I feel like really needs work. We need to make sure that space, not only access to space, but also information about space and using space is accessible to anybody. It's not just for the elites or for the very specialized. It can be accessible to anybody. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to work on within my company. One of the things that I believe in is trying to make this information and this knowledge about space and how to use space available to anybody in any field.
Definitely. Because, I mean, space to me, at least, is this very mystical thing. So to have somebody be able to explain it in more normalized terms would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we're using it right now, whether we realize it or not. And so people are using it. And I think that once it becomes even more available to the general public, everybody will be able to figure out how they can use space for their own benefit in whatever industry that they happen to be in. For any field that you can get into, there's a way to tie in space, and whether it's indirectly or directly, using Earth observations to figure out geospatial locations of things, or, there's just so many different ways to use it, material science or biology, and I could go on for another hour. There's just endless possibilities on how to use space, and a lot of these things are already being done, and most people just aren't aware of it. And so I think that the more people who are aware of the possibilities, the more space will become accessible for everyone.
As for final thoughts, Laura encourages students to see a career in space through their own unique skill sets.
A lot of times people focus on STEM education, and there's nothing wrong with STEM education. I myself am a scientist, but sometimes their overemphasis neglects the fact that there's so many different avenues to going into space. You can be pretty much any degree and go into space, as I was just sort of saying with the various disciplines. So space needs artists and communicators and, cooks and fashion designers and all of these various aspects of humanity. We need that in the space industry. And so when I talk to students especially, I want them to understand that they don't need to be geniuses in math or whatever it may be, that they have this misconception. They don't need to go into aerospace engineering, although they certainly can. But there are so many ways that they can get involved in space in whatever their passion is.
Laura was able to combine her people skills with her passion for space. We hope you're inspired by Laura's story to find your own approach to your passions, too. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.